go. So so my name is John Linden, CEO of Mythical Games. We are a parachain on the Polkadot ecosystem. We've recently migrated. We actually, I don't know how many months now, a couple months now. We've been 2 months now. I think we've been live with our first product. We actually have our second one is launching tomorrow. So we will be fully migrated as of tomorrow, which is great. We're driving a lot of volume already, which is exciting. So what I want to do today is share a little bit about where we see this going, where we see gaming going, how does it kind of affect the ecosystem, and really why we're doing this in the first place. So I guess the quick, there we go. Quick introduction. I've been in the game industry for about 15-ish years, something like that. Been able to work on some really great IPs. I was on the studio head for the Call of Duty franchise for many years, so I got to do 4 Call of Duties in 5 years. Skylanders franchise, and then had a mobile game company. So we've got to work on some great IPs around Marvel, Star Wars, Blade Runner, all types of different groups here. But what I really want to kind of talk through is what we've been seeing in gaming and how it's kind of driving to where we are now. So the first thing we kind of looked at is really what started this all, right? Where's the momentum going? And what we saw is that we saw a lot of the games that really sustained, the games that had longevity, were really player-driven. When you give the opportunity to consumers to be part of that economy in any major way, you have a lot of that kind of longevity that builds up. And if you actually look at some of the obviously very well-known brands, some of these have been around for nearly 20 years. We're closing in on 20 years with a lot of these economies. But the other piece we've started seeing is obviously what players are starting to identify us with digital identity. So digital identity has become a very, very large thing for gamers, right? It really makes up, as much as, kind of the previous generation, our physical identity, right? My children's Spotify playlist is as important as our CD collections or our cassette tape collections, things like that. I'm dating myself, obviously, with those comments there. So as we've seen kind of digital identity growing, we've also seen other big shifts start to happen that become permanent effects in gaming. So the first one was kind of free-to-play. So free-to-play, we basically went from 100 million gamers to now over half the world's planet are playing games every year. So we're closing in on 4 billion players in the gaming ecosystem now. So that's been kind of a trend that's stayed. That's not something that's ever shifted away. And same thing around user-generated content. We now see more content generated than any one studio could ever make, and a lot of that is produced by the consumers themselves. So that's another trend we've been seeing. And we really think that the next massive trends are fully underway, and we think these are going to be very permanent as well. So one of them, obviously, we've been focused on very heavily is around tradable assets, right? How do we bring digital ownership and all this to these ecosystems and do it in a way that makes sense to gamers? I will touch base a little bit on the other two that we think are kind of coming next. And one of those is around kind of cloud gaming, cloud distribution. I'll go through that. And then kind of what does social mean around games, and how do we see the changes happening with that as well? So we have seen a lot of Web3 gaming attempts. Some of them have worked, some of them have not. It's really been interesting watching that evolution, right? Particularly CryptoKitties was really the one I started following when I was at more of a traditional game company. Saw these little digital cats, and you could suddenly breed them or burn them or trade them or sell them. And that was really interesting. It didn't really feel like a game to me. It was more kind of a gamified economy, but that's really was an interesting concept. It's something we've been trying to do in the gaming world for a long time, and something you could do it very programmatically. Yeah, we saw some other ones. Axie Infinity really took off with this play to earn. We've seen groups trying to add kind of utility to art through their art collections with I think some mid-success. Obviously, Dapper kind of came out with their tradable collections. Again, we were kind of missing the game side of this. We started seeing the gamified economies, which was fascinating. We came out with kind of our first kind of foray into the space was a game called Blanca's Block Party, which was really a game first with optional Web3. And we had some great success on that. We actually are one of the few games that ever got to over 1 million players with that. And then obviously our more recent one has been a game called NFL Rivals. And NFL Rivals now, I think we're closing in on 6 million players now in that game. We just hit season 2. I'll share some of the data on there, but that's been really great. We're really starting to see mass volume and mass marketplace with these Web3 economies behind the scenes. And what I'm also excited about is we're now starting to see some really AAA game studios. Some of these games are actually made by probably the most prolific and important game designers ever. So Fusion Point is an example. They're looking at games in the space, created by a guy named John Smedley. He created a game called EverQuest back in the day. I don't know if you guys lost as much productivity as I did to that game. But we're starting to see groups like this everywhere. There's a guy named Leslie Benzie. He created Grand Theft Auto. So we're seeing really, really major names starting to look into the space. So I think we're now kind of entering into this new phase of what Web3 and gaming means. And we're also seeing very, very strong use cases of ownership. Why does this matter, right? Well, it doesn't matter unless there's actually real reasons to have this. And we're seeing opportunities with branded collabs, things like that. It almost becomes this new business development layer that sits on top of these games, right? We did an integration with Burberry. It was very successful. They won a bunch of awards. We saw a lot of promotion off of it. So this has been a really interesting opportunity. Obviously, anything that's limited, either time-based or quantity-based, has value to consumers. In fact, there's still people that buy free Fortnite accounts on eBay. Why would you buy a free Fortnite account on eBay? Well, it has an asset maybe you couldn't get anymore, right? So maybe you had the DJ Marshmallow from season 2, and I couldn't get it, so I'm going to buy it from somebody illegally, frankly, on eBay. But we've seen that now. If you let assets have this kind of time limit or a quantity limit, there's inherent value that we start seeing happen there. The most interesting one for us, I think, has been earned items, items that we don't even sell in the first place. They have to be earned in the game. And the only way to get these items, so we have these level of cards called Mythical tier. And what these cards are is basically you can only earn them in game. They're the most rare that we have available. But you can only buy them either from the player that already earned it, or you earn it yourself. Those are the only two ways to get that. And we've actually seen that those type of assets that aren't even sold in the first place end up being some of the most valuable assets to consumers. And the last thing, we've seen a lot of great opportunities around promotions. We had the first NFT back to drop on Twitch. We had the first one on kind of Amazon Prime Gaming, and that's been a really big opportunity to kind of pull traditional distribution channels into these new Web3 economies. Ooh, a little rough on this slide here, but I think what we've done is a little bit different. We've actually been building these peer-to-peer marketplaces really for consumers and not really for crypto traders. And that's a big distinction. Consumers, gamers really are consumers at the end of the day. They're not usually crypto traders. They're not usually even financial traders, right? They think in terms of liquidity. I want this, and I will give you this, right? That's kind of more their mentality. So I think what we've really tried to do is marry those concepts with Web3. And probably the best example of this is what we call quick trade. So we launched this last year, and basically the concept is we've really mimicked what we saw in traditional games and used Web3 to do something pretty cool. So if in most of these kind of NFT marketplaces out there, you could have bids and ask and floor prices and all that, and I can basically buy with crypto, or maybe I could buy with a fiat currency, right? So I could use my credit card to purchase. Well, we added kind of a third option. So we had an option to where I can now trade for it. So if I wanted an item, and let's say I wanted the Tarek Woolen item here, and it's going for $90, right? Well, I could buy it with a credit card, or I could buy it with crypto, but I can also say I want to trade for it. And if you look at almost any game that's come out in the last 20 years, a peer-to-peer economy in a game, there's two panels that show up. On the left side is here's what I'm willing to give up, and on the other side is here's what I want, right? And it's not necessarily one-to-one. I'm not looking at floor prices and asking bid prices and all that. It's just here's what I want, here's what I'm willing to give up. And that's kind of how games have worked. And we've essentially mimicked this to where I put an item, this is what I want. Again, I could buy it if I wanted to, but I can also start seeing all my other digital assets of ones I might be willing to give up. And not only that, but because we can use Web3 to see these transactions in real time, right? We can see the bids and asks happening. As I start selecting cards, we can actually price them in real time. And maybe I put these three on what I'm willing to give up, and it's also $90 as well. So now I can basically exchange and hit with a cashless transaction. I can receive the card on the left, and I can get rid of the cards on the right. So basically, we've mimicked exactly what you do in a video game. The difference is that there was 4 separate transactions, and actually it could be a 5-party transaction, because essentially what we did with our system is we're buying this from one seller, and we could be selling these 3 to potentially 3 different buyers. And I, as the consumer, is the fifth participant. So we actually kind of married 5 separate transactions into one atomic Web3 transaction. And this has been huge for us. What we've seen is that we're seeing, actually I'm gonna skip one ahead here. I might be missing a slide here. Anyway, what we've seen is that this is now making up a very, very healthy amount of the transaction volume. We're seeing a huge amount of growth that comes from this because it speaks to gamers. So we've heard this so many times. Gamers hate NFTs, gamers hate NFTs. I don't disagree necessarily. I hate NFTs in some cases as well. I think there's a lot of scams and a lot of things out there. And I'd say really more importantly is it's more gamers hate scams. They want to have something that's legit. And when we basically came up against, we had this game NFL Rivals, and when we launched it, we're coming up against an incumbent that's been around for 35 years. So this game, Madden's been around for 35 years, 3.5 decades. And so when we came out, we've been out for about a year, and we got a lot of people saying, oh, you're putting out a Web3 economy in a traditional video game. You're going to get review bombed. Everybody's going to hate it. No one's want to play this game. But what's really interesting is they're sitting at a 4.7 star rating, and we're sitting at a 4.8 star rating, and that's with over 135,000 ratings in the App Store. So it's really, really fascinating to see that we've actually been able to outrate the incumbent with a full Web3 economy behind the scenes. So I don't think that they really hate NFTs. It's how you present it. It's the utility you provide to the gamers that matter. So we've seen a lot of this. I'm going to skip through a couple slides here because I don't think I have a ton of time. But we've seen some really big opportunities. One, we've seen games that it really becomes, that we've seen some big amplification of game revenue. So with our first game, we saw a tremendous amount with Blankos. Rivals is only a year out, so it's only been, we just finished our first year, entering our second year. We're already seeing huge lifts in revenue from these secondary economies, which is huge. We're also seeing player engagement grow, though. People are playing more, they're interacting more when they have the ability to participate in that marketplace. And overall, we've seen a lot of studies now that they're actually pretty anxious to be involved in these marketplace concepts. So we're seeing great changes to game economies. It's making a permanent impact already in the games we've seen. You can kind of see here on the left here, this is kind of basically what we've seen in 1 year. So when we first started launching NFL Rivals, we were seeing about 200, 300 transactions a day. We're now seeing, actually, I think we saw something like 8,000 or 9,000 a couple days ago. So this needs to get updated. We're actually seeing just absolutely huge growth in 1 year. And not only that, but we're also seeing ARPDAU, which is a big stat we use in gaming, right? So average revenue per daily active user. We've actually been able to see it kind of optimize. So you can kind of see it just keeps climbing based on what ways we've now been able to interact, right? We've added things like crafting and collections, collection synergy, and the quick trade system and all that. And we're able to get kind of more and more and more efficient using these Web3 economies in a game. I do think, people talk about this creator economy. We want the creator economy in gaming. And I do think the creator economy will be driven by Web3. And again, what I think is fascinating about it is it really allows this business development framework to where brands can come in and really have their own opportunity to be involved, right? They can decide how they want to be involved in these economies and how they want their brands to show up in these games. And we've seen some great examples already. We've also seen great examples of independent groups, right? So these are artists from Blankos. These are all around the world. We have groups from Japan in here. We have groups from South Africa in here. And we've really seen these artist collaborations are able to bring their communities into these virtual worlds as well. So we're really excited on where this is going. The last one around this is we did just announce fairly recently, a couple months ago, and we'll be showing more very soon here. So we did announce with Pudgy Penguins, we're going to be bringing their brands into a new game. So there'll be more announcements soon. But what I get excited about this is I think this is the first Web3 brand that we've seen that is already kind of a triple threat, right? They've done nearly $400 million in secondary NFT sales, which is great. They're one of the top projects. They've sold over 1 million toys in retail. So they've been able to kind of move a Web3 brand now successfully into retail. But they also have this social presence too, and they've actually exceeded, I need to update that as well, because they're now over 20 billion impressions. If you know the Giphies that you can send gifts to everybody, they now have over 20 billion impressions from their own brand. It's more than Disney has in these ecosystems. So they're already kind of a triple threat, and we're basically bringing out another game with them. So we're very excited. We're hoping to be the quadruple threat now with Pudgy, and being able to bring their brand, their retail. I think there's the word out there, which is not my favorite word in the world, but phygital is what they call it now. So physical, digital. Sorry, it kind of cracks me up every time I say it. But phygital games is really kind of the opportunity to really tie all these together, right? Big brand, Web3 game, but also be able to tap into Web 2 economies, into retail economies, and have this all pulled together. So we're very excited on kind of some of the new opportunities that are upcoming. So we actually started off, we helped build what we call a mythos, right? So if you've been following, obviously, the parachain, it's not a mythical chain, it's a mythos chain. We're one of, I think, about 20 groups now that have joined Mythos Foundation. We've had some really great studios. These are the studios that have kind of joined with us. There's some big names in here. Some of these studios have been around for a long time. They have some of the biggest games in the world. And they've actually joined to help figure out how do we take this and really take this and make it more mainstream. So the goal of Mythos is not just around NFTs and marketplaces and DeFi and things like that. We actually think that there's these other pieces, and I'm going to talk very briefly on these, but we think distribution, how distribution is done in gaming, is going to be very much Web3 driven over time. And also how social works. We'll give you a little preview of something we're working on and we'll be announcing probably later this year. So the first one is really around cloud gaming, right? Cloud gaming is talked about a lot. It is the future. If you think about entertainment right now, if you want music, it's on demand. If you want a movie, it's on demand. You want a video game, You have to go download about 85 gig and hope you have enough hard drive space, right? So it's not on demand right now. And that has to change over time, right? So there have been some great companies, Google and Microsoft and NVIDIA, that have been doing cloud gaming. But there's a big challenge with this. So obviously, cloud gaming requires a GPU in the cloud. GPUs in the cloud are also used for things like generative AI or crypto mining, things like that. And they now run about $2 to $2.50 an hour if you were to use a cloud GPU. So I use kind of an example. If you guys ever saw that Fortnite Travis Scott concert from a couple of years ago, they ended up having 12.5 million viewers concurrently watching this thing. If you run that even at $2, that's a whopping $25 million an hour just to run those servers if you were to try and stream it. So obviously there's some economic challenges with cloud gaming that's keeping us kind of behind. So we actually made a purchase of a company in late 2021 called Polystream. And Polystream has a whole new technology, and we think this is really exciting, not only just for Mythical, but also for where Web 2 and decentralization can come in. So basically, the tech now can essentially kind of provide the same technology as a cloud gaming or cloud streaming, but we don't use cloud GPUs. So essentially, we're moving the GPU to your phone or your PC or your Mac and using your local GPU. And when you run the game in the cloud, you can essentially kind of run it with commodity hardware in a decentralized fashion and be able to still have the same concept around cloud gaming. So we've been testing this out. We'll be probably releasing something, we're hoping, late next year. We've been talking with several other groups. Some of them are Web3 developers right now that have been testing it out. And we think that this could be a very big concept of where we go next with Web3. I'm going to skip ahead here, one more slide here. So the other part we're really fascinated about is what social means, right? So how does social take effect in games? And I think what we're seeing right now, and we're actually testing a product right now, we'll be introducing this a little bit later, is kind of our view of social gaming, right? And what we found is that even when I was on Call of Duty, we saw things like no matter how many live events you run in a game, the community is going to run more, right? There's going to be things with community tournaments and all that. And so we actually think Web3 will help to redefine that. We think the idea that letting people be able to run their own tournaments and using Web3 contracts and smart contracts to interact with the games, but have their own kind of burgeoning ecosystems come out of that. So you'll be seeing a lot more from Mythos. We're actually talking to a lot of the other members of Mythos right now about how we can kind of roll this out. So overall, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm getting the signal here. I'm out of time here. But for us, we view this as kind of an evolution, not a revolution, right? This is how do we basically take gaming and evolve it into these new economies. We do think that the Web3 will be permanent changes to the ecosystem. We're already starting to see some great things happening. I think we'll see it happen not only just on the economics, but also on distribution, on social. And I think, honestly, a lot of these iconic IPs are really what's going to drive it. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that happen. As I mentioned before, some of the game developers that are jumping in the space now are doing some great things as well. So it's a little bit about Mythical, about Mythos, and obviously we are happy to be part of the Polkadot ecosystem here. So thank you very much.